The grand hall of the palace was bathed in the soft golden glow of morning, sunlight streaming through the towering arched windows, striking the polished parquet floors and gilded columns with dramatic brilliance. Dust motes floated in lazy arcs, catching the light like tiny stars suspended in air. Rowan Hale moved quietly among the shadows of the hall, boots whispering across the floors, eyes scanning for anything out of place. The ancient tapestries lining the walls seemed to hum with centuries of secrets, their intricate threads weaving stories of intrigue, loyalty, and betrayal. Today, Rowan's attention was drawn to a curious anomaly. A long-forgotten chest tucked into a corner beneath the grand staircase. Its surface was coated with a thick layer of dust, as though it had been deliberately ignored, or perhaps deliberately concealed. Rowan's instincts prickled. Centuries of palace experience had taught him that forgotten or overlooked objects often held more importance than their appearances suggested. The chest was unremarkable to a casual eye, but to a seasoned guard, it radiated significance. He knelt briefly, brushing his gloved hand across the dust, leaving a clear imprint, a silent claim that he had noticed what others had ignored. The palace was unusually quiet, the servants and aides occupied elsewhere, unaware of the latent drama about to unfold. Rowan's mind catalogued the possibilities: forgotten correspondence, ceremonial artifacts, perhaps even records the queen herself would rather remain hidden. His pulse quickened subtly, not from fear, but from the awareness that he stood on the edge of discovery, the threshold between routine guardianship and explosive revelation. Every echo of his boots against the parquet sounded amplified, as though the hall itself were holding its breath, anticipating the coming disturbance. He reached for the latch of the chest, fingers brushing against the cold metal. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse, but Rowan's steady pressure coaxed it open. A faint creak echoed through the hall, bouncing off columns and tapestries, a sound that would have been easily dismissed by inattentive staff, but was charged with the weight of discovery in Rowan's careful observation. Inside, the chest was lined with dark velvet, and nestled within were several envelopes yellowed with age, sealed with wax, bearing the unmistakable insignia of the royal family. Rowan's breath caught. He lifted the first envelope carefully, noting the delicate script on its surface. Letters addressed to and from Queen Camilla, their contents hidden but their presence undeniable. The weight of centuries of secrecy seemed to press down on him, the polished floors and gilded columns around him amplifying the gravity of the find. Rowan's heart raced with the recognition that this was no ordinary correspondence. The chest had been hidden, dust accumulating as though to obscure its existence from all but the most observant. The letters radiated consequence. Any revelation of their contents could ripple across the palace with immense impact. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the corridor outside the hall. Rowan froze, listening intently. It was early, and the hall should have been empty. The soft shuffle of a distant aide, unaware of the chest's existence, carried a fragile tension in its echo. Rowan moved subtly, positioning himself between the chest and the approaching figure, ready to protect the integrity of the discovery without unnecessary alarm. He understood the delicate balance. Exposure could ignite chaos, yet concealment could later be questioned. Every decision carried consequence. Rowan's fingers brushed lightly over another envelope. The seal was unbroken, yet the wax had darkened with age, almost black in the flickering sunlight. He felt a surge of anticipation. These letters were not mere family correspondence. The careful sealing and deliberate concealment suggested sensitive matters, alliances, disputes, private decisions, information the queen herself had deemed too delicate for casual eyes. Rowan's instincts warned him that this was potentially explosive. The discovery of the letters could spark scandal, disrupt palace protocol, or reveal secrets with diplomatic implications. A shadow fell across the floor. Rowan's head turned instinctively. Marianne, young aide and occasional shadow of palace logistics, stepped cautiously into the hall. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of the chest. "Lieutenant, what is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and apprehension. Rowan motioned for silence with a finger to his lips. "Stay calm. This chest contains correspondence. Based on the insignia, it is linked to Queen Camilla herself." Marianne's eyes widened further, reflecting both excitement and fear. The hall, grand and imposing, seemed to lean into the moment, every polished surface and shadowed corner amplifying the tension. Rowan carefully lifted another letter, inspecting its seal before placing it back gently. "We must proceed cautiously," he whispered. "Exposure of these letters could create a stir beyond imagination. Their existence is not yet known to the palace at large." Marianne swallowed hard, realizing the weight of what lay before them. They were standing on the threshold of a revelation that could shake the corridors of power. She shifted slightly, brushing against a polished column, and Rowan's hand moved instinctively to guide her back into shadow. Every motion mattered now. The hall's quiet amplified every whisper, every scrape, every heartbeat. A sudden clatter from the far end of the hall startled them both. Rowan's eyes flicked toward the sound. A palace servant had entered, unaware of the chest or its contents. The man froze at the sight of the chest, then looked to Rowan, confusion and alarm etched across his features. Rowan stepped forward, tone calm but authoritative. "This area is restricted," he said. "Return to your duties. Nothing here is to be touched." The servant nodded quickly, retreating with a muttered apology, the echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. Rowan exhaled slowly, aware that any misstep now could cascade into chaos. The letters called to him, a silent lure of intrigue. Yet Rowan knew discretion was paramount. He lifted one envelope with deliberate care, noting the faint outline of folded papers inside. The script, though hidden from view, carried the elegance and precision of official correspondence, yet the concealment suggested content of considerable sensitivity. Rowan's mind raced with possibilities. Personal disputes, financial arrangements, clandestine communications, any could ignite scandal if revealed. The palace was a stage of appearances, but behind the gilded walls, secrets held power far beyond ceremonial displays. Marianne, still tense, whispered again, "Lieutenant, what will happen if someone finds these letters?" Rowan's gaze swept the hall, ensuring the space remained undisturbed. "Then chaos erupts," he said quietly. "The discovery of correspondence linked to the Queen is enough to shake the palace. But if we protect this, we maintain order until proper measures are taken." His voice carried authority, calm but firm, and Marianne felt the reassurance of his control. The hall itself seemed to echo the weight of his words, shadows stretching across the floor, reflecting the immense gravity of the situation. A faint noise in the corridor beyond warned Rowan that time was short. The palace was awakening. Footsteps and voices would soon fill the halls. He needed to act decisively yet cautiously. The chest was moved slightly, its position adjusted to be less visible from the main corridor, and the letters were gathered carefully. Rowan's mind mapped the next steps. Secure the correspondence, alert senior guards discreetly, and ensure that no unintended eyes glimpsed the secret discovery. The palace demanded vigilance, discretion, and immediate strategic thinking. Rowan paused for a final sweep of the hall. Sunlight glinted off the polished floor, the columns, and the gilded stair railings, creating a shimmering kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The chest remained partially obscured, letters gathered and contained, but the hall itself seemed alive with anticipation, aware of the potential scandal that had been uncovered. Marianne's small presence beside him mirrored the gravity of the moment, a witness to history in motion and to a guard whose judgment and courage would shape the palace's response. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the far end of the hall. A senior aide had entered, drawn by the faint disturbance. Rowan's hand rested lightly on the chest, ready to act if needed. The aide stopped abruptly, eyes widening at the sight of the open chest and gathered letters. Chaos, Rowan knew, was about to erupt. The careful balance of secrecy and protocol had been tested. The palace would now react, and the consequences of discovery would ripple quickly through every gilded corridor, every polished floor, and every chamber where the Queen's influence held sway. Rowan inhaled deeply, steadying himself for what was about to unfold. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every moment of discipline would be tested. The dusty chest had revealed its secrets, and the palace was no longer a silent witness. It was about to become a stage for revelation, intrigue, and potentially explosive consequences. Marianne clutched his arm lightly, eyes wide, as the first shouts and startled exclamations began to echo through the grand hall. The letters had been found. The palace was waking, and Rowan Hale, lone guardian of protocol and truth, stood at the center of a storm whose consequences would echo far beyond the polished floors of the East Wing. The Grand Hall trembled with the first hints of commotion. Footsteps multiplied, echoing off the vaulted ceilings as startled aides and junior staff hurried toward the source of the noise. Rowan Hale remained unmoving, his presence a stabilizing anchor amid the rising chaos. He had already secured the dusty chest and its contents, placing the letters carefully in a protective pouch beneath his coat. But the energy in the hall was palpable, like a storm gathering momentum. Each step, each whispered question, and each hushed gasp carried weight. The palace, centuries old, seemed alive, sensing the disruption of its carefully orchestrated routine. Marianne stayed close to Rowan, wide-eyed, her nervous grip on his arm a subtle reminder of the stakes. "Lieutenant, they're coming faster now," she whispered, her voice quivering with anxiety. Rowan's eyes scanned the corridor that led into the hall, noting every movement, every reflective surface, every shadow that could conceal someone approaching unexpectedly. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "We manage this. Discretion first, chaos second. Do not let panic guide your actions." Marianne nodded, drawing a steadying breath, though the tremor in her body betrayed her apprehension. The first voice called out, sharp and questioning, a palace aide, young and eager, peering around a marble column. "Sir, what is happening?" Rowan stepped slightly forward, blocking the line of sight to the chest without drawing undue attention. "An accident," he said smoothly, voice calm but authoritative. "Nothing more. Move along and continue your duties. This area is temporarily restricted." The aide hesitated, gaze flicking toward the corner where the chest rested, then retreated reluctantly, whispering to a colleague who had just entered. Even as Rowan managed the first wave, he noted subtle irregularities. A faint draft, shifting papers on nearby desks, the light catching glints of wax seals, a whisper of movement in the shadows beyond the hall. The letters were fragile in more ways than one. They contained secrets that could unravel reputations, disrupt protocol, and, perhaps, ignite conflict within the royal family. Rowan understood instinctively that the next moments would require both vigilance and strategy. If the wrong eyes glimpsed the correspondence, chaos would erupt not just in the hall, but across the palace hierarchy. A muffled shuffle drew his attention to the far side of the hall. Rowan's gaze sharpened. A junior footman carrying trays of documents had paused mid-step, curious about the gathering commotion. Rowan moved smoothly, guiding him back toward the corridors with a firm but discreet hand. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "Nothing unusual here. Continue your duties." The footman nodded nervously and moved on, but the air was charged. Whispers had already begun spreading through the hall, small sparks of speculation igniting into an almost tangible energy. Marianne leaned closer, voice barely audible. "Lieutenant, what if someone important sees the letters?" Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Then we must act fast. The letters cannot be exposed yet. Timing is everything. Containment first. Explanation later." He shifted slightly, blocking sightlines to the chest as another aide approached. This one was older, more experienced, but his curiosity was evident in the sharp tilt of his head and the lingering gaze toward the corner where the chest had been. Rowan's hand gestured subtly, indicating discretion, and the aide immediately complied, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed unease. The palace seemed to respond to the human drama, its echoes carrying the rising energy further down corridors and staircases. The chandeliers swayed slightly from the faint tremor of footsteps, and the polished floors reflected fragments of sunlight and shadow in a dizzying mosaic. Rowan remained calm, each breath measured, each movement deliberate. He positioned himself strategically, ensuring that both the chest and the letters remained concealed while maintaining a commanding presence. Every instinct screamed vigilance. Every fiber of his training demanded discipline. A sudden, soft click drew his attention. The main doors at the end of the hall creaked open, and a small group of mid-level aides entered, curious about the increasing murmurs. Rowan held his hand subtly, signaling them to halt. "The hall is clear," he said firmly, masking the urgency behind composed authority. "Return to your duties." The aides exchanged hesitant glances, murmuring among themselves, before slowly retreating, the tension in their posture visible even as they obeyed. The palace itself seemed to exhale slightly at the controlled management of the situation, though the threat of exposure lingered in the air like a dense fog. Marianne shifted again, anxious, eyes wide as she observed the flow of staff. "Lieutenant, they're still talking about it," she whispered. Rowan's gaze swept the hall, observing the ripple of curiosity and concern spreading among staff. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "Their gossip will remain harmless as long as the letters remain hidden. Our task is to protect, not engage. Keep focused. One misstep, one accidental glance, and everything changes." Marianne nodded, trembling slightly but drawing reassurance from his presence. A faint sound of movement in the upper gallery caught Rowan's attention. The palace stairs led to a balcony overlooking the hall, where senior officials sometimes observed operations or ceremonies. A shadow flitted across the railing, likely an observant staff member or junior officer curious about the disturbance below. Rowan's hand rested lightly on the chest, now fully secured under his coat, and he adjusted his stance to obscure both the letters and his movements. Every action was a delicate choreography, balancing authority, secrecy, and control under mounting pressure. From the upper gallery came a hushed voice. "Is something happening down there?" Rowan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew that if senior staff or royal aides intervened too early, the situation could spiral into an uncontrollable spectacle. He had to maintain order until the letters could be safely moved and contained. He stepped slightly, voice calm and steady, projecting authority without panic. "No cause for concern," he said. "Routine preparations. All is under control." The voice paused, uncertain before retreating. Rowan exhaled slowly, maintaining composure, though every nerve in his body remained alert. Marianne whispered, anxious, "Lieutenant, what about the Queen?" Rowan's eyes flicked toward the portraits lining the hall, imagining Camilla's reaction if the discovery reached her ears. He could anticipate the chaos her awareness of these letters would ignite. The potential for scandal, secrecy breaches, and palace upheaval was immense. "Not yet," he said, voice low, steady. "The Queen must not know until the letters are secured. Any premature revelation will turn curiosity into chaos, whispers into uproar." Marianne's eyes widened further at the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. Rowan moved toward a side corridor that led to a secure office nearby. The chest and letters were carefully concealed under his coat, each step deliberate and measured to avoid detection. The faint hum of the palace's activity surrounded him, the polished floors amplifying even the quietest footsteps. He glanced briefly at Marianne, who followed silently, understanding instinctively that her role now was to assist without drawing attention. Every shadow, every reflective surface, every subtle shift in light could betray their presence. Every sound could ignite the curiosity of unsuspecting staff. The murmurs in the hall below began to rise, subtle at first, then louder, fragments of words filtering up the corridors and staircases. Rowan felt the pulse of urgency grow, the danger of exposure increasing with each passing second. Staff were murmuring about the chest, the letters, and the faint scent of scandal that seemed to emanate from the corner where it had rested. He moved quickly but cautiously, aware that even a minor misstep could unravel hours of careful discipline and discretion. Finally, reaching the relative privacy of the side corridor, Rowan paused, chest secured and letters concealed. He exhaled, surveying the route for the next phase, moving the correspondence to a fully secure location where the palace hierarchy could be consulted and consequences measured. Marianne's quiet exclamation of relief reminded him that while immediate chaos had been avoided, the letter's discovery would not remain unnoticed for long. The palace, with all its grandeur and centuries of protocol, now stood on the precipice of revelation, intrigue, and disorder, waiting for the next move in a drama whose stakes were immense. The distant echoes of hurried footsteps grew louder, reverberating against the high ceilings of the grand hall. Rowan Hale tightened his grip on the concealed chest and letters beneath his coat, moving with careful precision toward the side corridor. Every instinct screamed that time was short. The hall below, now alive with curiosity and gossip, threatened to spiral into full-blown chaos. He could hear murmurs escalating into sharp whispers, fragments of speculation about secret correspondence, the Queen, And what scandal might be hiding inside that dusty chest? Lieutenant, they're going to see us if we're not fast, Marianne whispered, her voice trembling. Rowan exhaled slowly, keeping his movements calm and controlled. We move carefully, but decisively. One wrong step, one misaligned glance, and the letters are exposed. The palace cannot yet know their contents. His eyes swept the corridor, noting shadows and reflective surfaces, the subtle glints of sunlight that could betray them. Marianne followed silently, trusting his guidance, heart pounding in sync with the growing unrest below. As they rounded the corner, a familiar voice carried from the hall a mid-level aide, young but perceptive, whose curiosity had drawn him too close to the scene. Lieutenant Hale, what's going on with that chest? Rowan froze, assessing the risk. The aide's question, though casual in tone, carried the potential to ignite panic. Rowan's response was calm, measured, authoritative. Routine maintenance. No one needs to concern themselves. Move along. The aide's gaze lingered for a brief moment, curiosity warring with obedience, before he hesitated and then turned away, muttering to himself. The soft shuffle of footsteps echoed again, this time accompanied by a whisper that carried a hint of alarm. The letters! Could they be? Rowan's senses sharpened immediately. Someone else was now aware that something unusual had occurred. The danger was no longer just discovery. It was the spread of knowledge, however partial. He adjusted the weight of the chest under his coat, ensuring it remained invisible while keeping a vigilant eye on the corridor ahead. Every second mattered. Every movement had to be deliberate. Marianne's small voice trembled. Lieutenant, what if the Queen finds out? Rowan's gaze swept the corridor, noting the faint glimmer of sunlight on the polished banister, the shifting shadows of distant staff. If the Queen learns prematurely, chaos erupts. We are guardians, not catalysts. Discipline now keeps the palace intact. Exposure now could shatter it. He adjusted his stride, stepping lightly yet with authority, moving toward a secure office that had been established for sensitive matters. Every reflection, every creak of the floorboards beneath him was a potential alarm, and he accounted for each. As they approached the office, Rowan heard the faint clack of boots against marble from above the balcony that overlooked the hall. A senior aide had paused there, suspicion etched across his face as he surveyed the growing commotion below. Rowan's posture shifted subtly, signaling caution. He could not allow even the most experienced staff to glimpse the chest or its contents. The letters represented not just scandal, but a moral and political minefield that could engulf the palace if mishandled. He moved with precision, ensuring that the path to the office remained secure. The grand hall below was now a hive of speculation. Voices rose, fragments of words audible even from the corridor. Camilla, secret letters, the chest. Rowan's mind catalogued the potential fallout. Rumors alone could ignite palace-wide tension, even before the Queen herself was aware. His role as a guard was no longer simply about observation. It had escalated into active containment, managing both information and the unpredictable reactions of staff. Marianne's grip on his arm tightened instinctively, reflecting the collective tension of a palace on the verge of upheaval. Reaching the office, Rowan quickly secured the door, ensuring it could be closed without drawing attention. The polished brass latch clicked softly, sealing the letters from immediate view. He set the chest carefully on a side table, its dusty surface belying the explosive importance of its contents. Marianne exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly, but her wide eyes still betrayed anxiety. Lieutenant, what do we do now? She asked softly. Rowan's gaze swept the room, calculating, alert to every potential intrusion. We assess, we protect, and we prepare. The letters cannot leave this room, and no one beyond us may know of their contents. Timing and discretion are everything. A faint rustle outside the office reminded Rowan that the palace was still awake, still moving, still alive with curiosity. Staff lingered in corridors, whispers rising and falling, eyes darting toward the source of commotion. Rowan positioned himself near the door, every muscle coiled with readiness, baton in hand. Though never drawn, his authority derived from discipline and presence, not immediate force. Marianne moved behind him, silent but alert, observing the hall as it continued to pulse with rising tension. Suddenly, A loud gasp rang from below. A junior aide had accidentally caught sight of the open chest through a gap in the staircase railing. Rowan's eyes darted toward the sound. The disruption was immediate. Voices surged upward, fragmented but insistent. The chest! Queen Camilla's letters? The hall was beginning to erupt. Rowan's hand rose slightly, signaling calm, but the moment was precarious. The potential for total exposure was imminent. Staff were gathering, curiosity and apprehension escalating into a tangible wave. Lieutenant Hale, a voice called from the hall, sharp and authoritative. Report immediately. What is happening? Rowan recognized it as the palace protocol officer, mid-level but experienced, and aware that direct confrontation now would not permit evasion. He took a deep breath, moving toward the slightly ajar door to acknowledge authority without revealing contents. All under control, he said calmly, masking the urgency in his voice. Routine matter being managed. The officer's gaze lingered, suspicion faint but perceptible, before he nodded cautiously and retreated, leaving Rowan with precious moments to stabilize the situation. Marianne whispered, anxious. Lieutenant, do we open the letters? Rowan shook his head slowly. Not yet. Exposure before proper authorization would be catastrophic. We maintain containment, observe reactions, and decide next steps. Any premature disclosure risks the entire palace. His voice, calm and steady, conveyed authority and reassurance. The room, though small, seemed charged with anticipation. Every shadow, every reflective surface, every sound of movement outside became a potential vector for chaos. Rowan glanced at the chest again. The wax seals on the letters glimmered faintly, fragile and delicate, a visual reminder of their power. Each envelope contained correspondence that could alter perceptions, disrupt trust, and reveal intentions the Queen might prefer remained hidden. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from awareness of the moral responsibility now resting on his shoulders. The palace's hierarchy, its rituals, and its fragile balance of authority all depended on his judgment. From the hall outside came the unmistakable murmur of gossip, rising louder and more insistent. Rowan's eyes narrowed. They are circling, he murmured to Marianne. We need to remain calm and contained. Every movement we make now carries weight. Marianne nodded, holding herself steady, as Rowan secured the chest in a slightly hidden corner of the office. Every step, every breath, every glance was deliberate. The letter's potential for scandal was immense, and the palace was already teetering on the edge of upheaval. A sudden, sharp knock at the office door startled them both. Rowan's hand instinctively rose toward the latch. Who is it? He called, voice steady. Authorized palace staff, came the reply, cautious yet insistent. Rowan exhaled, measured. He had to decide carefully. Exposure could ignite panic. Refusal to allow entry could spark suspicion. The letter's secrets had already begun their ripple effect, and the palace was bracing for revelation. Rowan's next move would determine whether containment or chaos would dominate the day. The murmurs in the grand hall had grown into a low, insistent roar. Staff and aides now clustered near the staircase, glancing furtively at the spot where the dusty chest had rested, their curiosity thick with speculation. Rowan Hale remained in the side corridor, letters safely secured beneath his coat, but he could feel the tension radiating through the walls. Each echo of hurried footsteps, each whispered conjecture, carried the potential for disaster. The palace was alive with anticipation, teetering between order and chaos, and Rowan knew that the first misstep could ignite scandal. He gestured subtly to Marianne, who followed close behind, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and apprehension. Keep calm, he whispered. We cannot let curiosity or panic drive the palace today. Containment is our priority. Everything else is secondary. Marianne nodded, trying to steady her racing heart. The polished floors reflected slivers of sunlight that flickered across the walls, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. Every shadow seemed heavier, every echo more pronounced. They moved swiftly, carefully, yet deliberately, toward the secure office where the letters could be assessed. From below, a sharp voice rang out. Lieutenant Hale, explain yourself! Rowan froze, recognizing the palace protocol officer who had returned. suspicion etched into his expression. Without hesitation, Rowan stepped forward, maintaining a calm authority. "All is under control," he said, his voice steady, deliberate, masking the urgency. "A minor disturbance was contained. Nothing has been compromised. The situation is managed." The officer's brow furrowed, doubt flickering in his eyes, but the discipline in Rowan's posture gave pause. After a tense heartbeat, he nodded curtly and withdrew, leaving the corridor silent once again, though the echoes of the hall below continued to rise. Marianne whispered, "Lieutenant, do you think the Queen knows?" Rowan's eyes shifted to the portraits lining the corridor, imagining Camilla's reaction if she learned of the letter's discovery. The mere thought of the Queen's fury sent a shiver through the air. "Not yet," he said firmly. "If she learns prematurely, it will ignite chaos. We secure the letters, then determine the proper course. That is our priority." He moved to the office door, opening it with deliberate calm, stepping inside and gesturing for Marianne to follow. The polished floor inside seemed muted compared to the storm gathering in the hall. Here, for a brief moment, they had a fragile pocket of control. Rowan carefully placed the letters on a side table, arranging them so the seals remained intact and the contents concealed. He examined the wax stamps, noting their fragile state and the care with which each had been closed. These were not ordinary correspondences. They were intentional, confidential, and carried a weight that demanded caution. Any premature disclosure could create serious complications, stir unwanted attention, or cause discomfort within the royal household. Rowan kept his pulse steady, even as his mind tracked every possible outcome, every subtle effect these letters might have if revealed. A sudden, sharp sound outside the office door made him tense. Another staff member, perhaps drawn by curiosity, approached cautiously. Rowan moved to the door, opening it just enough to peer through. A young aide froze, startled at the sight of him, eyes widening at Rowan's calm, authoritative stance. "All is secure," Rowan said quietly, yet firmly. "Return to your duties. The hall requires order, not speculation." The aide hesitated, then obeyed, retreating slowly, muttering to colleagues. Rowan exhaled, momentarily relieved, though aware that containment was temporary. Whispers in the hall below were escalating. From the staircase, he could hear fragments of voices, rising in pitch and urgency. "Camilla. Letters. Chest." Rowan's jaw tightened. He knew the Queen's name alone would amplify any rumor, her influence magnifying the weight of the discovery. If the letters were linked directly to her, panic and scandal were inevitable. He moved with deliberate care, ensuring the letters remained concealed, the chest positioned to avoid accidental discovery, and every potential witness managed with calm authority. Marianne followed silently, absorbing the intensity of the situation, her breath shallow as the echoes of the hall reached their ears. Rowan's mind raced. The letters contained secrets, communications likely intended to remain private, potentially altering perceptions of loyalty, influence, and trust within the royal household. If revealed prematurely, these letters could provoke confrontation, resentment, or worse, a collapse of trust between the Queen and her advisors. He had to act decisively, yet with discretion. Every footstep, every movement, every subtle gesture had to maintain control over the escalating chaos. He moved to a side cabinet, preparing a temporary secure lockbox to protect the letters while he assessed the situation. Marianne watched intently, her wide eyes reflecting both awe and fear. "Lieutenant, will the Queen find out?" she whispered. Rowan's gaze hardened with resolve. "Perhaps, but not until we ensure the palace is calm and no unnecessary eyes have witnessed the letters. Timing is critical. Premature exposure invites scandal. Control preserves order." From the hall below, a loud gasp suddenly rang out, followed by a collective murmur that surged into a low roar. Rowan froze. A junior aide had apparently glimpsed the letters in the chest before they were secured. Panic was on the verge of spreading, and he knew the palace hierarchy would soon demand explanation. Without hesitation, he stepped into the corridor, chest and letters concealed beneath his coat, and moved with authority toward the central staircase. Every movement radiated discipline, every breath measured, projecting confidence to contain the escalating curiosity. Staff parted instinctively, sensing his authority, murmuring behind him with growing urgency. Rowan reached the center of the hall, positioning himself near the chest, now fully secured. "All staff, remain calm," he called, voice carrying with authority over the low roar of whispers. "Nothing is compromised. Continue duties. The situation is under control." His presence, calm but commanding, slowed the rush of curiosity, creating a fragile equilibrium in the chaos. Marianne remained close, eyes scanning the hall, watching how whispers and speculation slowly yielded to discipline and authority. A hush fell over the grand hall as a figure approached from the far end, the queen herself. Camilla's expression was unreadable, her eyes sweeping the crowd, narrowing slightly as she observed the unusual gathering of aides, the subtle positioning of staff, and the unmistakable presence of Rowan at the center of the controlled disturbance. Her voice, low and sharp, cut through the quiet. "Explain this immediately, Lieutenant Hale." The hall seemed to pause, breath held collectively. Every polished floor, gilded column, and shadowed tapestry bore witness to a standoff that would define the morning. Rowan stepped forward calmly, eyes meeting hers with disciplined steadiness. "Ma'am, the chest and its contents were found unsecured. The letters inside bear your insignia. I secured them to prevent accidental exposure and to maintain order in the hall." Camilla's eyes flicked toward the chest, realization dawning. A subtle flash of shock and irritation crossed her features, quickly masked by composure, but Rowan noted it. The queen, accustomed to absolute control, was now faced with disciplined resistance, principled and measured. Marianne shifted slightly, whispering, "Lieutenant, she's going to be furious." Rowan's jaw tightened, voice steady. "Maintain composure." "We acted to protect the crown, the palace, and the integrity of the letters. Authority, discretion, and loyalty have preserved order." The queen's gaze lingered on him, assessing, calculating, weighing both consequence and principle. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed frozen, every polished surface reflecting tension and anticipation. Camilla exhaled slowly, acknowledging the controlled chaos and the guards' unwavering vigilance. "Very well," she said finally, voice low but precise. "You have prevented premature exposure, but the contents must now be examined." Rowan inclined his head respectfully, relief hidden beneath professional calm. The palace, chaotic moments before, had been stabilized by principle, vigilance, and measured courage. Staff murmured quietly, some in relief, some in awe, aware that they had witnessed an extraordinary demonstration of authority and loyalty. The letters, still sealed, remained secure. Rowan had succeeded in containing both discovery and initial panic. Yet even as the palace exhaled, he knew the ripples of the revelation would spread far beyond the hall. Intrigue, speculation, and consequence were inevitable. The queen's acknowledgement, tempered with control, marked a temporary resolution, but the storm that the letters could unleash had only begun. The palace, centuries old and steeped in ritual, had once again been reminded that loyalty, vigilance, and moral courage could shape events as much as power and influence.